After 75, 99% of deaths happen for these 5 reasons: how to avoid them and stay healthy. Gerald Whitman lived to be 83. A retired engineer, he had headed a federal highway design team for nearly 30 years. He and his wife Eleanor lived in the old wooden house that once filled the summer with the laughter of their children and grandchildren. But this morning, the yard was deserted. The swing where Eleanor used to sit and knit was covered with dust. Gerald was alone. 2 years ago, Eleanor died suddenly after falling in the bathroom. The fall, which seemed minor, shattered her hip. She never recovered. Just 6 months later, she died of complications from an infection and respiratory failure. From then on, Mr. Gerald lived in torment, not because of the pain of separation, but because of the terrifying feeling of realization. I didn't know. No one told me it could come so soon. He began to research, study, and go through each of his wife's medical records. And he discovered a terrifying truth. 99% of people over 75 die not because of old age, but because of 5 completely avoidable causes. It wasn't that Gerald was afraid of death. He had lived a full life. But he didn't want any of his friends, or anyone else for that matter, to have to share his regrets. So that morning, he picked up the phone, called his nephew, a geriatrician, and began his quest to understand the top 5 causes of death after age 75 and how to combat them. And the miracle story began here, a journey that not only saved Mr. Gerald, but also changed the way he lived each day, each last minute of his life, with peace, strength, and initiative. So if you're 70 or older or have a loved one who is, stay until the end of this video. We'll take you through Gerald's entire journey, from loss to fear, to understanding the 5 most deadly causes of death and how he overcame each one. And if you find this story relatable to you or someone you love, leave a comment below sharing your story or share this video with them. Don't forget to like if you found this video helpful, and hit subscribe with the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos, where we continue to tell real poignant stories that could save your life or the life of a loved one. Daniel stood watching his grandfather, the man who once carried bags of cement without blinking, who once repaired the roof himself when he was nearly 70, now sitting gasping for breath just a few steps from the door to the chair. "Grandpa, do you know how many years your heart has been overworked?" Daniel asked softly, his eyes filled with unspoken worry. Gerald was silent. He was not one to admit weakness easily. But that morning, he had to nod. It was the first time he had felt truly tired, not because of old age, but because his heart had been straining for so long. The heart doesn't speak until it's too late. Gerald's story is the story of millions of Americans over 75 who think that fatigue is normal, shortness of breath is due to age, chest pain is due to sleeping in the wrong position. But the truth is, the heart doesn't scream when it's in trouble. It just keeps on calling for help in vague signals until it's forced to stop. Gerald doesn't smoke, rarely drinks, and isn't overweight. But he's been working for 40 years, skipping breakfast, drinking coffee instead of eating, and after retirement, he barely moves. He just sits on the porch, listens to the radio, and reads the newspaper. His heart, like an engine that has not been serviced for years, began to slow down. And he didn't know it. Cold numbers. And the price of subjectivity, according to the CDC, more than 30% of deaths after age 75 are related to cardiovascular disease. But the most heartbreaking thing is, most of them are completely avoidable. Gerald had no idea that his blood pressure had been dangerously high for 6 years. He had no idea that his dinner of bacon and fries, Eleanor's favorite, was a hidden killer that was slowly narrowing his arteries every day. And like millions of others, he felt nothing, until just climbing 5 flights of stairs left him gasping for nearly 10 minutes. Reviving the heart, not with medicine, but with truth. After the examination that day, Daniel did not prescribe any medicine immediately. He just gave Mr. Gerald a piece of paper. On it were written 3 simple lines. 1. Walk 20 minutes every day, no matter the weather. 2. Replace red meat with salmon, white beans, and green vegetables. 3. Drink enough water, sleep early, laugh a lot. Gerald read and laughed. You think that simple can save my heart? Daniel replied, not to save, but to give it a chance. 3 months later, Gerald could climb the stairs without stopping. He no longer woke up in the middle of the night with chest pain. Every morning he walked around the small park near his house, chatting with his dog, Max, his only surviving friend from the war. That spring, for the first time in years, Gerald went out into the garden and planted an apple tree himself. Not because I was sure I would live to see it bear fruit, he said, but because I wanted to live long enough to see it happen. And that's why the heart, the thing you can't see or hear, is where you should start if you want to live longer. It doesn't require you to run 10 miles. It just requires you to listen to it soon, before it collapses into silence. Enemy within the home, one fall can be forever. That summer, nearly half a year after Gerald began taking care of his heart, his health had improved significantly. He no longer needed assistance going up and down the stairs. He went for morning walks in the park. Sometimes he even cooked himself a light breakfast, oatmeal with banana and honey, the same dish Eleanor used to make. But one afternoon, as he reached for a spice jar in a high cabinet, he reached too quickly. His right foot landed on the kitchen rug, and in half a second, Gerald fell backward. The impact wasn't loud, but when he woke up, he was lying on the floor, his back aching, and the phone was out of reach. One fall, and 4 hours motionless on the cold floor. 4 hours. No one heard, no one knew. Gerald lay there, head a little dizzy, palms bleeding from holding on to the edge of the cupboard. It was only when the neighbor, Mrs. Mildred, came over to borrow the lawnmower and heard his faint cries that she discovered him. In the emergency room, the doctor diagnosed soft tissue contusion in the lumbar region, no broken bones, but a pulled muscle in the lower back. If he were 5 years older or had severe osteoporosis, he could have broken his hip. Gerald was only in the hospital for 2 days, but what haunted him was not the pain but the feeling of helplessness as he lay on the floor of his house, unable to get up, with no one noticing. 75 years old is not afraid of illness, but afraid of falling. His nephew, Dr. Daniel, said only one sentence when he visited, "Sir, after 75, a fall is not an accident anymore. It is the first step of losing freedom." That sentence seemed to stab into Mr. Gerald's heart. Daniel continued, "There are patients he treats for cancer, for heart disease, but they still live well for 5-10 years. But just a broken hip after a fall, many people never walk again. And that's the brutal truth." According to the National Institute on Aging, more than 800,000 seniors are hospitalized each year because of falls alone, and the majority of them are in their own homes. The familiar house is the most dangerous place. Gerald thought about it. He had lived in that kitchen with Eleanor for 40 years. He knew every corner like the back of his hand. But it was that familiar place that almost made him lose the ability to walk. He began to notice the slippery carpet in the kitchen, the dim hallway lights, hard to see at night, the lack of handrails in the bathroom. And most importantly, he was not prepared for the fact that he was getting weaker. From that day on, Gerald wrote a list of protecting yourself in your home. 7-day plan to save your legs. 1. Day 1. Remove all slippery rugs and replace them with non-slip rubber rugs. 2. Day 2. Buy a sensor light for the hallway. It automatically turns on when he leaves the room at night. 3. Day 3. Install grab bars in the shower and next to the toilet. 4. Day 4. Buy a pair of indoor shoes with non-slip soles. 5. Day 5. Go to the senior fitness center and sign up for a leg strengthening class. 6. Day 6. See your doctor again to review your medications. A blood pressure medication you're taking may be causing mild dizziness. 7. Day 7. Do the chair stand exercise 10 times every morning. Sit down in a chair, stand up without using your hands, to strengthen your thigh muscles. He didn't do it all in one day. He didn't need a treadmill or a fancy gym. He just started with one small thing every day, but he did it. And once again, Gerald stood up by himself. 2 months later, Gerald was no longer afraid to enter the kitchen. He could stand up from his chair without holding on to his arms. He was no longer timid like a weakling, but confident like a man who knew his body well. One afternoon, he looked out the window. His new neighbor, Annette, 76, was struggling to walk her dog. Suddenly, she tripped over a tree root and collapsed. Gerald ran out. For the first time in years, he helped another person up. Every breath becomes precious as we get old. One November morning, after returning from a walk, Mr. Gerald felt a pressure on his chest. It wasn't pain, nor was it suffocation. It was just, every time he inhaled, he had to try a little harder. At first he thought it was the cold weather, but after only 3 days he started coughing, not violently, just dry, intermittent coughs. But what worried him most was he had to sleep sitting up at night. Every time he lay down, he felt as if his lungs were no longer strong enough to support his chest. I have never smoked. Why can't I breathe? That was the question he asked Dr. Daniel during an emergency visit in early December. Gerald had prided himself on not smoking, not being around smokers, living in a rural area with clean air. But Daniel shook his head. Grandpa, lung disease in the elderly does not need a big reason, just living long and breathing too much in unclean houses. Daniel explained, the respiratory system weakens very quickly after age 75. The lungs are no longer elastic. Just a little bit of fine dust in the house, a little bit of mold in the bathroom, or cold air entering the lungs is enough to cause the alveoli to swell, mucus cannot escape, and he cannot breathe like before. CT scan results. Early stage COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, was a name he had never heard before. But the doctor said, it doesn't kill you right away, but it takes away your quality of life day by day. And then one day, it turns a cold into pneumonia. And pneumonia is the reason for death on the death certificate. Gerald was silent. What you don't see is killing you every night. Daniel brought him home. But this time, not to rest, but to check the entire living environment. They discovered the heating system was old. Fine dust was flying everywhere. The bathroom had mold around the tiles. Max, the dog, was shedding a lot. Hair was flying around the curtains and carpet. And the kitchen had no exhaust system. Every time you cook, grease gets into the air. I can't move house, but I can change this house. Gerald did not give up. He and Daniel made a list. 1. Buy a good air purifier and place it in the bedroom and living room. 2. Wash curtains, replace carpets, remove dust collectors. 3. Call a technician to clean the entire heating system. 4. Install exhaust fans in the kitchen and treat bathroom mold. 5. Practice deep breathing every morning for 5 minutes, called warming the lungs. 6. Practice yoga movements for the elderly, chest stretch, shoulder opener, bronchial stretch. 7. Get regular influenza and pneumococcal vaccinations. Gerald began to breathe by his own will. After 2 weeks, his cough subsided. But it took him nearly 2 months to sleep normally again, lying on his left side without a pillow and without waking up in the middle of the night choking. and for the first time in years, he returned to the Senior Citizens Association at his local church to join the choir. As he sang along, he suddenly burst into tears because he had never thought he could sing with his once depleted lungs. One breath, you can lose it at any moment if you are subjective. Breathing, like life, leaves you without making a sound. It just gets quieter until you can't climb stairs, can't laugh out loud, can't recite a scripture without pausing. But just like your heart, you can keep it by taking care of the environment you breathe every day, from air purifiers to hand washing, vaccinations, and getting up to take a deep breath every morning. Stroke. When death doesn't knock at the door, but just turn off the lights. It was neither cold nor hot that day. Max was lying on the rug in the sun, and the radio was playing an old jazz song by Nat King Cole. While eating, Gerald remembered his appointment with Annette, the neighbor he had helped up after a fall. Just a morning coffee at a small shop at the end of the street. Nothing special, but when he raised his hand to scratch his left temple, he suddenly realized he felt nothing. The left hand dropped. The spoon hit the floor with a clink. He tried to say, "Max," but no sound came out. His left eye was blurred, as if covered by frosted glass. 30 seconds of tension between life and death. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Gerald knew what was happening. He did not lose consciousness. On the contrary, he was terrifyingly alert. He knew he was having a stroke, but he could not speak, could not stand, could not pick up the phone, could not scream. Only his right eye was still bright. And it was those eyes that saw Max, the loyal little dog, raise his head and come forward to lick his hand. And then, Gerald's eyes began to blur, as everything tilted like a painting flowing out of its frame. 17 minutes later, ambulance siren tearing the wind. Annette, seeing that he had not arrived at the cafe as scheduled, called. No one answered. She rushed over to the house and called 911 herself. 17 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. 3 minutes later, Mr. Gerald was taken to the emergency room at Central Carolina Medical Center. At that time, he could only move his right hand slightly. His speech was still slurred, but his brain was not permanently damaged because it was still within the golden window of the first 45 minutes. Stroke is not an accident, but the result of a lifetime of negligence. After settling down, Daniel, the doctor's nephew, came and said, "Grandpa, I know you're careful, but strokes don't spare anyone. It doesn't come from a day of eating salty food, but from 10 years of ignoring your blood pressure. It doesn't come from fatigue, but from blood clots that build up in your heart from not drinking enough water, not sleeping, and silent stress." Gerald lay still, tears falling. Not because he was afraid of dying, but because he was afraid of losing his ability to speak, losing his memory, losing the right to be himself. Things you should have done before the stroke knocked on your door. 1. Measure your blood pressure every morning, like brushing your teeth. 2. Drink water regularly, at least 1.5 l a day, even if you are not thirsty. 3. Get 7 hours of sleep. Cut out coffee after 3 p.m. 4. Supplement with omega-3s, green leaves, reduce salt and processed foods. 5. Get light exercise every day, especially walking. 6. Have regular heart rhythm checks, especially for signs of atrial fibrillation. 7. Learn the 5 early signs of a stroke. O. Facial numbness. One side of the mouth droops. O. Weakness in limbs. Difficulty lifting or standing. O. Stuttering or mumbling. O. Blurred vision in one eye. O. Severe headache of unknown cause. Daniel printed them out and stuck them on the refrigerator door, where Mr. Gerald could see them every morning. And then, the miracle recovery starts from the first two syllables. After a week of speech therapy, Gerald said his first 2 words, "Annette, thank You. The room erupted. Annette burst into tears. Daniel wept, and Gerald, for the first time, felt like he had escaped death, not by luck, but by preparation. Strokes are not someone else's business. They can happen while you're eating breakfast, making a phone call, or sleeping. But they're 80% preventable if you control your blood pressure, your heart rate, and don't ignore the small signs. Most importantly, post a stroke warning sign in your home and teach your loved ones how to call 911 because sometimes you won't be able to speak. Memory loss. When a person gradually forgets the name of the person they love the most. He wanted to write down his memories, not to publish or show off to anyone, but to remember, so that one day, if he forgot, what remained on paper would remind him of who he was, who he loved, and how he lived. But this morning, it took Gerald nearly 10 minutes to remember the name of a close friend who served with him in South Korea. Last night, he spoke to Annette, but called her Emily, the name of his sister who died 30 years ago. And then, that afternoon, Gerald went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood there for nearly 15 minutes, not knowing what he was there to do. I'm not crazy, I'm just forgetting myself. Daniel came to visit, tested with a simple cognitive test, and the conclusion was clear. He started showing signs of mild dementia, MCI. It's not Alzheimer's, but it's early stages, and if left unchecked, it can come on very quickly. Gerald nodded, not panicked, but heartbroken, because he knew if the heart can be cured by exercise, if strokes can be avoided by checking blood pressure, if breathing can be saved by air filtration, then memory, once lost, is almost impossible to regain. And then, the most painful question he had ever heard. Annette held his hand as they walked together. Gerald, if one day you no longer recognize me, should I continue to visit? He choked, because he himself, years ago, took Eleanor to take care of her sister, who had lived the last 5 years of her life with Alzheimer's, couldn't remember anyone, didn't know her name, after eating asked why she hadn't eaten yet, and sometimes screamed because she looked in the mirror and didn't know who was in it. But Gerald did not surrender to memory. That very evening, he did something he had never done before in his life. He wrote a diary. First line, "My name is Gerald Whitman. I was born in 1940. I was an engineer, Eleanor's husband, Daniel's grandfather. I survived heart disease, falls, COPD, and strokes. And now, I will live on. Every memory, every morning, every dream. Even if it fades, I want to keep it all so I don't lose myself." 7 things he does to preserve his brain and memories. 1. Practice handwriting every day, no typing. 2. Play Sudoku, do crossword puzzles, do simple math every morning. 3. Reread old books he read 30 years ago and underline the things he loved. 4. Take a slow dance class where you have to memorize the steps. 5. Eat berries, almonds, green vegetables, and fatty fish, a little every day. 6. Drink green tea and fish oil instead of alcohol. 7. Talk, a lot, deeply, with family, neighbors, even strangers. And then the miracle happened. Not in one day, but every sunny afternoon, 3 months later, Daniel came to visit and asked him, "Grandpa, do you remember what day is today?" Gerald smiled, pulling out an old wedding photo from his wallet. It was the day he first kissed Eleanor, 59 years ago, and it was also the day he began to learn to love himself again, little by little. Daniel hugged him. No more words needed, because sometimes memories don't need to be kept in the brain, they need to be kept in the heart. You may forget someone's name, forget the way home, forget the taste of food you used to like, but don't let yourself become someone you don't recognize. Taking care of your mind doesn't start when you forget. It starts when you remember. Read, write, Speak, remember, tell, laugh, cry. That's the way to keep yourself. I won't live forever, but I've lived long enough to not miss out on the things that matter most. If you're on that journey, start today. If you have experienced or are witnessing your parents, grandparents, or loved ones gradually forgetting themselves, please share that story in the comments section. If you feel this video helps someone, please share it with them. Click like to help YouTube bring this video to more people. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Real, touching journeys that can save a life.